What's up, guys? Doomwake here, and welcome back to another episode of Watching the Meta, the weekly series where we take a look at the Magic Online results over the weekend, paper tournaments, if those are available to us, and I definitely say if those are available to us, and we take a look and see what everybody's playing, what's winning, what's doing well, see if there's any spice that people have played over the weekend, and there definitely is a little bit of that, and there's some overlap too, which I always like to see. So we are going to start, as we always do, with the modern format. And this weekend, I'm recording this on a Tuesday, it's probably going to go out tomorrow on a Wednesday. This weekend is Portland, the regional championship, the first US regional championship, and I can't really wait to see what people are going to be bringing. Now, I think a lot of people expect the metagame is going to be heavily focused around three decks, those being Boros Energy, Yggdrasil of some form, whether it's red-green or Temur, and Grinding Breach. Those are kind of the three decks of the format. And then you kind of have the Orzhov Blink deck falling a little bit behind in fourth, and I think that not only is it falling behind in terms of representation, I also think it's falling behind in terms of matchups. I don't think it has a great matchup against Boros or honestly any of the top three. I think it has problems against all three of those, personally speaking. You can shore those up, but in any case, we are going to take a look at the metagame for the modern challenges. There was an NRG event that took place on Saturday, like a solo modern event, but I was only able to find the deck list for top 8. I could not find the full top 32, so I decided to omit that. That was won by Yggdrasil, by the way. And you see here, this is kind of exactly what we were talking about. Boros Energy, 16%, Grinding Breach, 15.6%, Gruul Yggdrasil 11.3, up significantly from last week from 3.8, but you'll also notice that Temur went from 10.3 to 3.5. So I think a lot of people realize that you don't need the third color, and they switched from Temur to Gruul. Now, I will mention the list that won NRG was technically Temur, and I did include anybody who was just splashing Null Drifter in the Temur category. There's kind of two camps here. You either play Gruul with Writhing Chrysalis and I think Stone Rain in the sideboard, or you play Temur with Null Drifter main. Now, not all of the Temur lists also have blue cards in the sideboard. Some of them have Consigned to Memory, some of them don't, but a big part of why Temur is good is because Null Drifter allows you to flashback Kozilek's command for 3 mana, and that is extremely important, not only against Boros, but also against the Blink deck as well. Speaking of Blink, went from 7.2 to 9%, so a slight uptick, but nothing too significant. Dimir Oculus, slight uptick. People still haven't learned that that deck is not very good right now. Blue Belcher, Ruby Storm, roughly about the same. Amulet, slight uptick. Everything else is mostly the same. One thing here, Jeskai Energy from 1.3 to 4.7. Jeskai Energy won 2 challenges this weekend. Now, I say Jeskai, it really is just Boros with Expressive Iteration. We're going to take a look at a deck list in a second, but worth noting. And you do get the sideboard Consigned to Memory for the Eldrazi matchup. That's pretty big too. So that's what the metagame looks like. The winners, as you can see, 3 Boros, 2 Jeskai, so 5 total challenges were won by Energy. That's a lot. 1 Breach, 1 Blink, and then 1 Rakdos Yggdrasil. So we're going to start off the proceedings by looking at the Jeskai Energy deck. So as you can see here, a lot of what you would expect from Energy stuff, where you have the classic Ajani, Guide of Souls, Ocelot Pride start, still have Phlages, still have a couple of Ragathans here, and then your blue splash, I forgot there was actually Mockingbird in the deck too. So Mockingbird is really cool because Ranger Captain is a card that some of the Boros players are starting to adopt anyways, but if you're playing Ranger Captain and you're playing blue, Mockingbird makes a lot of sense for a couple of reasons. One, you can copy Ajani, and then you can Legend Rule make sure you keep the regular Ajani, not the Mockingbird, but that lets you flip Ajani. You can chain Ranger Captains, where you can go Ranger Captain for Bird, Bird copy Ranger Captain for Bird, you see where this is going. And then Mockingbird copying on Ranger Captain kind of gives you this sort of, not endless loop, but buying enough turns against the Breach deck where they can't cast non-creature spells to cross that finish line. I mentioned the Expressive Iterations in the main deck, 4 copies of those, and then in the sideboard, 4 Consigned to Memories, which, if Eldrazi is one of the worst matchups for Boros, playing Consigned to Memory makes a lot of sense. I mean, it is the single best card against Eldrazi. Not only do you get to counter basically every spell in their deck that's not a Utopia Sprawl or Malevolent Rumble, But countering triggers is even more important against them than even countering the spells, because it's the one of the few things that actually interacts with Kozilek's Return. You do have Thraben Charm, you do have some other graveyard hate sometimes, some lists play Surgical, so you can do that too. But yeah, Consign, if you are specifically targeting Eldrazi, sideboarding Consign makes a lot of sense. And then you saw it in the intro, we talked about how Rakdos Yggdrasil won a challenge, and here it is. Selesniel, who is a name that I feel like is reoccurring on this channel in terms of the Spice Corner when we look at spicy deck lists, and this deck won a challenge. This deck is built around Yggdrasil Rebirth Engine, which I've seen blue-red versions of this deck that play Null Drifter, they sideboard Consign of Memory, sometimes I think they play counter spells too, but Yggdrasil is it's basically a weird Through the Breach, where when it enters, you exile creatures from your graveyard, so if you already have an Ulamog in there, you can put it under there. You can tap to exile the top 3 cards of your library, so even if you don't have a creature, you can just try to high roll with the Yggdrasil itself, and then 4 tap, put a creature card that's exiled with it into play, give it haste. So if you can't really do anything with Emrakul, because Emrakul shuffles itself back in if you discard it, but you can do something with Ulamog, right? And the nice thing that ties this whole deck together, because you are, like, look at this, you have Goryo's Vengeance, Through the Breach, and Yggdrasil, so you have 12 ways to put a big thing into play. You can combine that with Faithless Looting. Looting happens to work very well with both Yggdrasil and Goryo's Vengeance. Looting Emrakul, normally not good with Yggdrasil, but it is very good with Goryo's, where if you have 3 mana, looting, discard Emrakul, trigger on the stack, Goryo's, get it back. So I like this deck, and on top of all of that, we're playing 4 Eldrazi Temple and 4 Ugin's Labyrinth to pair with our 12 big Eldrazi's. I don't know, this deck looks kind of powerful. It doesn't really have a ton of interaction, right? It's really just all combo pieces, but it seems like it has a lot of different combo pieces, and maybe something you should consider. Now we get into the real spice from Jacksonian26, who has decided to play Aboran Oculus with no self-mill? Question mark. So here's the idea. You have Aboran Oculus, which is an extremely powerful card if you can cheat it into play. The blue-black decks do this by discarding it with Unearth. But what if I told you that there's green ways to put it into play? It happens to be that there's actually 8 green ways to put it into play with 4 Collected Company and 4 Birthing Ritual. So this is taking a page out of the Green-White Rituals decks book, where you're utilizing Birthing Ritual with Mana Dorks and Powerful 3s, so you can go Mana Dork into Powerful 3. You also have a bunch of 2s that you can sacrifice into the Aboran Oculus, like Icefang Kodal. There's also, see, a Keen-Eyed Curator. There's a Coiling Oracle, a Collector Oof, all these powerful 1-ups that you can hit. You have your Mana Dorks, 4 Noble Hierarch, 2 Birds of Paradise, a couple Endurances that are also reasonable hits off of both Coco and Birthing Ritual, and then I think the important one, 3 Harbinger of the Seas. Another powerful lockout piece that you just hit off of one of your ways to cheat a creature into play, and sometimes that just ends the game on the spot. A couple of Reflector Mages, some weird 1-ups like Cankerbloom, but I don't know. Looks like a pretty interesting deck list. And the other cool thing is post-board you get 4 White Orchid Phantom, so you can start like chaining those with Ritual and Company. Really, really cool take on the sort of green-white Ritual deck and just finding more ways that we can cheat Oculus into play. And then last but not least, from Smigui? 20th place. This doesn't really have a ton of new cards, but I wanted to highlight this because this is the first list that I've seen that has had Kragenwick Cremator that did like the top 32 to challenge since the unbanning of Faithless Looting. This is a deck that I thought more people would try out when they saw Looting got unbanned, just because Looting, again, as you see here with Goryo's Vengeance, Looting is a good way to enable degenerate things with Goryo's, whether it's putting Emrakul in the graveyard or sometimes even putting Yargle in the graveyard. If they don't have a blocker, they're taking 18. And then you have the other synergy where you can discard cards to Cookbook and then set up a Cremator when you only have one big thing in hand, either an Emrakul or a Yargle, and they just take a boatload of damage. Looting is also another good way to empty your hand for Kragenwick. Just something to think about. I don't know if this is the most powerful deck list with Faithless Looting, but it is an idea that I had thought about and I hadn't seen anybody try it out, so wanted to give Smigui a shout out. Let's talk about Pioneer for a little bit, shall we? And by a little bit, I mean a little bit. I don't know. Pioneer is, I keep saying this every week, it's in a weird spot. There's not a ton of innovation happening. There is some metagame shifting going around where, like, you'll notice Gruul Prowess has been picking up in popularity a lot over the past couple of weeks. I believe the week prior, it went from like 3 to 13, and now it's gone from 13 to 16. It really just is a standard deck with Kumano faces Kakazan and Play with Fire. There's really not a ton of like Pioneer legal cards that are in the Gruul Prowess deck, which is kind of interesting. Rakdos Prowess 12.5, but about the same from last week. Demons, a little bit of an uptick there from 7.5 to 11.9. Dimir Bounce taking a bit of a hit. Esper Bounce picking up a little bit in popularity. Pretty big surge in Mono Green Devotion, which I thought was strange. 3% last week to 9.4% this week. And then, everything else is about the same, roughly. Niv to Light, a little bit of actually a pretty big downtick from 4.4% to less than a percentage. So some interesting things there. But yeah, for me, I don't know. The Pioneer really just looks like glorified standard. And maybe that's the way it's always been, but it just doesn't feel like Pioneer has its own identity right now, especially with, like I said, less people innovating and trying things out because it's not competitively supported anymore. I want to like Pioneer, I just don't really have the motivation to play it right now. Challenge winners, even though Gruul was the most played deck, didn't win a challenge. We got 2 Rakdos Prowess, a Boros Mice, an Izzet Phoenix, and a Rakdos Demons. So I got 3 deck lists that I wanted to show you guys here for Pioneer. First, from Thief of Crowns, who I believe I think they had 3 different top 32s with this deck. It might have only been 2. I'll have to check my numbers on that. But it is green collected company with a light blue splash. You see a common theme in today's deck list here where people are just really trying to cheat this Abhorrent Oculus card into play. And for good reason. It's kind of messed up. So, Collected Company showing up again here with Abhorrent Oculus. This time we have Elvish Mystic and Llanowar Elves. And then instead of trying to play other value type 3 drops like you noticed in the last deck list that had Reflector Mage, Endurance, and all these creatures that have some sort of other utility when they come into play, this is just beatdowns. 4 Pack Leader, 4 Sharp-Eyed Rookie, 4 Old Growth Troll, 4 Kazandu Mammoth. And then the other cool thing about this deck list is you have Fiend Artisan, which you normally only see in decks that are utilizing the graveyard to an extent, but this is just yet another way, you guessed it, to cheat in Abhorrent Oculus. And on top of all of that, we're even a Nykthos deck because we're near mono green anyways, and we have a lot of pips. Really cool deck list here from Thief of Crowns. Big shout out to them. Talked about a little bit with the Boros Mice deck winning a challenge. Well, here it is. And if you were a standard player, you would probably say to yourself, isn't this just a standard deck? You would be mostly correct. There is 4 copies of Wizard's Lightning, 4 Soulscar Mages, and 4 Kumano Faces Kakazan. And I guess a better mana base because you get to play with Needle Verge Pathway and Sacred Foundry. So, yeah, but it mostly is just a glorified standard deck. Just wanted to highlight this one because it did win a challenge. I know that there was a period over the past couple of weeks where people just started playing more standard decks in Pioneer. It started with Dimir Bounce, then it was Esper Pixie, then it was Gruul Prowess, now it's Boros Prowess. What next? What standard deck are we going to be trying in Pioneer next? Let me know in the comments section down below. And the last deck I wanted to highlight here is Phoenix. This isn't spicy at all. Well, it kind of is. So I have not really seen anybody in Pioneer try out Demolich in Izzet Phoenix, and this is the first one that I had seen like that, so wanted to get highlighted. And it also top-8'd a challenge, so can't be that bad. Mostly everything else is the same. They are still playing 4 Artist Talent. I think basically every single Phoenix list that I've seen is now on 4 Talent. Essentially nobody is playing Shredder anymore. They've all moved to Talent, which I think makes sense. I think we can all agree that Talent's a much better card, and it doesn't expose you to removal on the Shredder, which is nice. 3 Stern Dismissal in the main deck. Kind of don't hate this just because it's a nice catch-all in terms of your secondary removal spell. You know what's also really interesting that I'm just noticing? Only 2 copies of Lightning Axe. That's very interesting. Okay. So the numbers here are a little different, but really I just wanted to highlight Demolich in Izzet Phoenix, which is typically a card you only see in Modern. Maybe it's good enough for Pioneer. And last but certainly not least, let's take a look at Standard. Now, it's kind of a weird time to be playing Standard right now because it sort of feels like the most lame duck format as in, and what I mean by that is that Standard is the format that is most likely to be affected by Aether Drift, which is coming out in roughly about a week from now. And people, there's not, it feels like there's not really a ton of reason to innovate because of how much Aether Drift is going to shake up the format. Go check out that Aether Drift video that I uploaded. It should be in one of the corners, whether it's top left or top right. I'll have my editor put it up there. But yeah, long story short, Standard, not a ton happening right now. But what is happening, Dimir Bounce, slight downtick from 18 to 11. Gruul Prowess from 15 to 11, also a slight downtick. Pretty big uptick in Esper Pixie, went from 7.8 to 17.2%. A little uptick in Golgari from 7 to 12. Mono Red, about the same. Oculus, huge downtick. Jeskai Convoke, exactly the same. Tokens, roughly the same. So, as far as the big shifts are concerned, Esper Pixie seems to be like the deck that has emerged as the best deck in the format. And I kind of agree with that. I recently won an RCQ with the Esper Pixie deck, and oh boy, that deck is ridiculous. Didn't win a challenge though. We got 5-color Overlords, Dimir Bounce, Gruul Leyline, and Jund Delirium. So I got 3 deck lists that I wanted to show you guys real quick before I let you get out of here. Speaking of Jund Delirium winning a challenge, expect a YouTube video from this one in the near future. Owl1013. This list looks pretty good. I mean, there is a lot of what you would expect from the Delirium decks. You have the enablers like Fear of Missing Out, which is an enabler and a payoff. Patchwork Beastie, which is, again, an enabler and a payoff. Wildfire Wicker Folk, which is a pretty good payoff. You have the self-mill like Seed of Hope. You have Breakout to find creatures. The cool thing about Breakout is it looks like it's only a sorcery, but a non-zero amount of the time, like with the games where you break out into Fear of Missing Out, you can actually put multiple types into your graveyard in the same turn. And especially because the Breakout gives the Fear of Missing Out haste, it can set you up for some pretty explosive turns. Still we have a couple of fly traps, and then the black splash here. We did say it was Jund, so let's talk about the black cards. 3 Go for the Throat, which I like. I think it makes a lot of sense. The Gruul deck before was pretty sketchy against big creatures, namely Shieldred and Preacher, because it played Torch. Those cards don't really interact with Preacher that well. So I think playing Go for the Throat makes a lot of sense. And then 2 copies of Osseous Stick Twister, which you may not have seen this one unless you played some Duskmourn Limited, but if you have Delirium, on each of your end steps, your opponent can choose either to sacrifice a non-land permanent or discard a card. If they don't, they take 2 damage, and the Stick Twister deals the damage, so you do gain the 2 life as well. Does make the mana a little awkward. You have to play a whole bunch of black sources, but when I played it a little bit last night, mana was not too bad, so it's probably okay. And then black also gives you Duress in the sideboard alongside Preacher of the Schism for the Nowhere to Run decks, which I think is a fantastic sideboard option here. You could also play Sentinel the Nameless City, but if you're playing black, might as well play Preacher. Apologies for using Goldfish for these last 2 deck lists, but for some reason this event was not loading on the MTGO website. Arcani1, I wanted to shout out here, who is a name you might recognize if you have watched this series. I believe it was I think it was last week when we talked about Arcani1 getting second in a challenge with Ban Infect. This is a red deck, mostly what you would expect from a red deck, but I feel like I hadn't seen this sort of mono red splash sellsword version really pop up recently. So this is the first time that I really looked at like a version that had 4 sellswords and a bunch of demonic ruckuses. Not sure about this main deck Skullduggery, but just the idea of playing the mix of cards. The numbers that Arcani has feel really good. 6 1-drops that deal damage with the 4 sellswords. You have the 8 pump spells with 4 rage and 4 turn inside out. Demonic Ruckus I thought was very good when I played this deck. So nothing too crazy and innovative here, but just a list that I like a lot of the numbers in, and you could do much, much worse if you were playing a red deck in Standard. And then last but certainly not least, I wanted to showcase this sort of mono-white-ish new take on mono-white, where we have removed the mono part of the white and we've added black at the beginning, so we are now black-white. So this is a version that I've seen popping up somewhat recently. Not as popular as mono white, of course, but it is starting to creep up a little bit in popularity. And black does give you access to some pretty cool cards. So you get to play Cut Down and Go for the Throat, which If you saw my video of ranking the removal spells in Standard, you would know that White clearly has the weakest of the removal spells. So getting to splash playable removal spells instead of having to play Get Lost, which they still have 2 copies in this deck, so I guess I lied. But it's a nice idea to be able to upgrade the removal spells there. You also get to play Pest Control. I played against somebody on Arena the other day who had 3 Pest Controls in the main deck. I was playing Pixie, and they really wanted to beat Pixie, and they did. Now, the other card that we're splashing black for, this card has, I think it had, I mean, you can count the numbers here. It's like 40 lines of text. I don't actually know what this card does. Please be sure to let me know in the comments what Kaya actually does. I've tried to read the card and understand what it does, but I still can't figure it out. So give me the TLDR on Kaya's text box. Wrong answers only in the comments. And then you get to play some blotouts in the sideboard, couple of Kaya Intangible Slayers. I know what that Kaya does. And a couple of Duresses as well. So interesting take in the mono white control deck, although not sure how playable this deck is going to be if everybody's going to be playing Spell Pierce next format. So that's it for watching the meta. This is not the last video before Aether Drift, but the second to last one, because this weekend's results for MTG are not going to have Aether Drift. Because of that, well, maybe I'll skip Standard. Maybe we'll do like a little bit of Pioneer and Modern, because there's really no point in focusing on Standard too much before Aether Drift comes out, especially the week before. But in any case, I'll figure something out for next week. Again, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing to the channel, like the video, and until next time, adios.